Britain's former Prince Andrew has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office.
Andrew was detained early at the Sandringham estate, taken into custody on his 66th birthday.
Your Majesty!
Do you have any reaction to the arrest of your brother, sir?
Well, that was King Charles being asked about the arrest of his brother, the suspect formerly known as Prince Andrew. He's being investigated for alleged misconduct in public office, a very serious offence which can be punished with life in prison. Yes, it involves his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, in a moment, we'll be hearing from the man who reported Andrew to the police. We'll also be asking the Queen's former press secretary what she knew about Andrew's activities. And we'll be speaking to the woman who got the final photo of Andrew and Epstein together, which spelt disaster for the prince. But first, let's look at why Andrew was arrested.
Your Majesty, how are you feeling after your brother's arrest?
Are you concerned about Andrew's arrest, Your Majesty?
Afternoon, Your Royal Highness. How do you feel about your brother's arrest?
This is a well-established charade in the UK. Journalists ask the royals questions and the royals ignore them. But that's okay. The press have done their job.
The former Prince Andrew has spent the day in custody following his arrest. Police in unmarked cars swooped on his new home on the Sandringham estate.
No royal has been arrested in modern history.
400 years since that happened last time.
Authorities searched his house in Norfolk and his former royal residence near Windsor Castle.
The news stunned the nation. Prince Andrew had finally been arrested. But it wasn't for allegedly abusing young women, allegations he's always denied.
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady.
It was on suspicion of misconduct in public office, the evidence for which had been revealed by the press 10 days earlier.
Andrew Mountbatten Windsor appears to have knowingly shared confidential information with Jeffrey Epstein when, as Prince Andrew, he was a UK trade envoy. Emails seen by the BBC from the recently released Epstein files show Mr. Mountbatten Windsor apparently passing on details of investment opportunities.
After watching the news, a leading anti-monarchy campaigner, Graham Smith, reported Andrew to the police.
You reported Andrew to Thames Valley Police. Why did you do that?
On the weekend, the BBC report was saying that the Epstein files were showing that Andrew had shared confidential information with Epstein. We will see whether by the end of the week they are knocking on palace doors and carting away files, but I'm not holding my breath.
But of course, 10 days later, that's exactly what happened. Hours after the arrest, the King put out this statement. I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. Later, the King attended the opening of London Fashion Week, and it was back to his typical royal duties. Let's bring in Graham Smith now, the man who reported Andrew to the police. He runs a campaign group called Republic, which seeks to abolish the monarchy. Graham, welcome to the programme. It seems like an obvious question, but let's just start at the beginning. Why did you report Andrew to the police?
On that weekend, before I reported Andrew, I saw that there was a story breaking, and so it seemed to me that someone should report Andrew. And I know from experience that the police rarely do anything about royals or accusations against them unless they are reported, and even then they often don't. So I thought, well, let's make sure they don't have any excuse for dodging this and put the report in front of them, which is why I reported him on that Monday morning.
And it seems a bit of a technical question, but how exactly did you file a report on a former prince?
Oh, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a form to fill in, essentially. You do it online. I mean, you use whatever language you would use in any other case. And then it says, do you know who the likely suspect is? And you say, I don't know them, but I know who they are. And it is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. And, it says, can you describe them, their height, their average age and so on? So, yes, I can. Just look up Wikipedia. So, it's fairly straightforward.
Well, 10 days after you filed the report, Andrew was arrested on his 66th birthday. What was your reaction?
I was probably as shocked as anybody else. And it took a bit of time to process exactly the scale of what was going on. I don't know whether it was an emotional reaction other than, I just gobsmacked, really, that they would go that far that quickly.
Graham, do you think it was your report that led to the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor?
I do think that had I not reported it to them, they would have, if they'd been asked as to whether or not they were investigating, they would have said, well, we've not received a report. So we're not, until that happens, we're not going to be looking at it. So now, it's speculation because, of course, we don't know what would have happened if I hadn't done that. But as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person that reported Andrew to the police. It's fairly early, sort of 7:30 in the morning on the Monday that I reported him. I told the press I reported him. The press then went to the police and said, are you doing something about this? And by mid-afternoon, they confirmed that they were looking at it and doing the initial assessment. And it was that evening that the palace released their statement saying that they obviously would support any investigation that happened. And by the end of the week, they were saying that they were actually investigating, at which point I think people started to draw those comparisons with Mandelson, saying, well, if you're investigating, what are you doing? Why aren't you turning up at his door and taking away the evidence? So yeah, I think there was one of the key points in the chain of events that led to his arrest.
Of course, King Charles is trying to distance himself and the rest of the royal family from Prince Andrew. Do you think that will work?
I don't think it's going to work. It's going to work a little bit for a little bit of time, but the question that I keep on hearing from all sorts of people, including royalists, is what did they know when? What did they do about it? Why did they cover for him? Why were they protecting him? And we know that they must have known about these things. We know that the late Queen must have known about these things. I mean, aside from anything else, they knew everything by 2022 sufficiently to pay off Virginia Giuffre to the tune of £12 million. So I think there's quite a lot more to come out, and the notion that they are somehow, have clean hands in this is nonsense. And I think that's going to continue to drip feed into the public consciousness and damage their reputation.
And what does his arrest mean for your cause?
This is the most serious crisis that the monarchy has faced in modern times. But one of the most damaging things for them is that people, including royalists, are demanding openness and transparency, and they can't survive openness and transparency. They've been hiding so much in the closet and behind closed doors for so long that there's an awful big pile of secrets that would come out. So they're now in very dangerous territory where they've woken people up to some of how awful they can be, how secretive they can be, what sort of influence they can have on people like the police. And so there's going to be endless questions about who they are really and what they've been up to and who knew what and when. And those questions aren't going away. And all of that makes their job a lot easier.
Graham Smith, thanks so much for sharing your experiences with us today. Really appreciate that. The journalist Annette Witheridge is about to tell us how she got this photo of Andrew and Epstein in New York. But first, let's look at how it forced the royals to face reality. The king is trying to put as much distance between the royal family and Andrew as is possible. That's why he stripped him of the prince title back in October, leaving him a commoner and vulnerable to prosecution.
Prince Andrew will now be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
The royal family can rebrand Andrew as much as they like, but they cannot rewrite history. They cannot say they didn't know Andrew had continued his relationship with Epstein even after he was convicted in 2008. They knew, we all knew, thanks to the press. This photo was taken in December 2010 and published in February 2011. It was the first visual evidence they'd stayed friends even after Epstein's conviction. A flurry of newspaper articles followed, revealing the depth of their financial and social ties. And a few months later, in July 2011, after a decade of flying around the world on taxpayers' money, Andrew was forced to step down as the UK's special representative for trade. Worse was to follow, much worse. This video of Andrew inside Epstein's New York townhouse was filmed at the same time and by the same news team that took the photo in December 2010. It was only widely released after Epstein's death, nearly a decade later in 2019. It proved the two were far closer than Andrew had let on, and added to the pressure on the prince to defend himself in this disastrous interview with the BBC.
But you were staying at the house of a convicted sex offender.
It was a convenient place to stay.
Well, joining me now is the journalist Annette Witheridge. Welcome to the programme, Annette. Everybody worth their salt in the business would have liked to have got that photograph. Tell me the story of how you and your team got it.
Oh, it was a long, hard, sort of 3 days, we received a tip-off that Andrew was in New York privately, which means if he was working, he would stay with the British Consul General at the official residence in New York. He wasn't there because it was a private visit. I had no idea where he was. And then I suddenly thought, Jeffrey Epstein. So I went off to Jeffrey Epstein's residence, which is the biggest private residence in Manhattan. So like 53 rooms. And as I walked down the road and got closer and closer to Jeffrey Epstein's place, there was some bodyguards standing outside, or at least men in rain macs with earpieces talking into their cufflinks. And they had British accents. So I knew if it wasn't Andrew, somebody else very important was there, but logically it was Prince Andrew. So Jay Donnelly, a photographer I work with, he came down to join me. This is like 8:15, and we sat and we sat and we sat and we waited for another 2 days. In fact, all of the day Saturday, and then on the Sunday, finally, just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Prince Andrew suddenly appeared, walking out of the house with Jeffrey Epstein, and they did a 20-minute stroll in Central Park, which always struck me as weird. It was so cold, and nobody knows why they went walkabout. It was just very odd, but there you go. They went for a walk.
And you mentioned the bodyguards. The police are now questioning some of those bodyguards. They want to know what they knew. Do you think they knew what was going on?
I don't know how you could not know what was going on. I mean, I sat outside for 2 days, well, longer than that, actually, because he was still there. There were young girls going in and out, literally every hour and a half, every 2 hours. 2 would go in, 1 would come out. Now, I can't say they were underage. It was bitterly cold. They all had perhaps big puffer jackets with hoods or hats. None of them had any makeup on. Were they 18? Were they 14? Hard to tell. Yeah, and there was no way on earth those bodyguards outside didn't see that. We now know as well they were given rooms inside Epstein's mansion and were guarding the dinner party, those sort of things that Epstein organised for Andrew. So they couldn't not have known.
And Annette, your team also filmed the video of Andrew in Epstein's house. Now, it appears to outsiders that you all sat on it for 10 years. What happened?
It was, this is the early days of the News the World's webpage, internet. This is like 2010, 2011, which seems crazy now. It did actually appear on the News the World's website at the time. It was behind a paywall and wasn't very good. What can I say?
Okay.
But nobody really saw it. So, of course, all those years later, it was like, oh, what about the video, the brief video picture? It's a fuzzy picture, but it's still a picture of Andrew waving goodbye at Epstein's door. That's how comfortable he was in the house. And it was also, the person he was waving goodbye to was the daughter of a former Australian Prime Minister, which added to it as well. The picture was seen by everybody, or the video was seen by everybody all those years later.
And Annette, we've been talking about how it's been the press driving these revelations over the years. We never get anything from the royal family proactively. They're always reacting to press reports. Do you think they are inclined to cover things up?
I personally don't have any knowledge of Buckingham Palace or the royal sort of palaces, covering stuff up. But they're most certainly not happy when stuff comes out. And it's journalists who follow that. The police probably would have done nothing, except that suddenly, an avalanche of things have happened, really in the last few weeks with the release of the Epstein files, that have prompted other people. And, finally, Prince Charles to act as well and say enough is enough. I think when the Queen was alive, Andrew was most certainly her favourite child, and she forgave him a lot.
And, of course, Annette, we must mention that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor still to this day denies any wrongdoing. Annette Witheridge, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So how badly is this scandal damaging the royal family? And how does it compare with the 1990s when Charles was the prince in the chair, giving the car crash interview about his adultery? Well, let's bring in Queen Elizabeth's former press secretary, Dickie Arbiter. Welcome to the programme, Dickie. Let me ask you, how does this scandal compare with anything that's gone before it in living memory?
Well, before my living memory, it probably ranks as high as the abdication of 1936, when Edward VIII abdicated in December 1936 and his younger brother took over the throne. But in modern memory, it really is off the charts in terms of scandal. Scandal for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, not so much for the monarchy as an institution. The institution is strong, but it does affect the family.
Well, we know that King Charles has taken steps to put up a firewall between the family and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, including stripping him of his title back in October. Has he taken the correct steps? Are these adequate to preserve the monarchy?
Well, they're certainly the correct steps, because there's no way that Andrew could have continued with his various titles. There was a call and suggestions that he should have been stripped earlier, but it can't be done just like that. In fact, as we know, that he is still the Duke of York, although he's not allowed to use it, and only Parliament can remove that, and with it, parliaments of the other 14 realm states. There's also a call for him to be stripped of his line of succession.
Dickie, the late Queen, who you worked for quite some time, she knew that Andrew continued his relationship with Epstein even after he was convicted. Why didn't she punish Andrew earlier?
You know, it's very difficult. Andrew's her son, his family, and what parent wants to go against family? She was always there to protect the institution, but allowing Andrew to continue the way he was continuing wasn't exactly protecting the institution. And yes, she should have done more, but nobody could tell her what to do in terms of the family. The family was her concern and the late Prince Philip's concern, and not, I was one of the press secretaries, and not my concern. So she didn't act properly. She did stop him from continuing being a working royal, which was the first move. She did strip him of his military honours and his royal patronages. That was another move, but that took almost 2 years. So she didn't act swiftly enough, and she didn't act enough.
And Dickie, please take a look at this photograph of Epstein, Maxwell and Harvey Weinstein in the grounds of Windsor Castle for Princess Beatrice's 18th birthday. That's Andrew's daughter. This was in July 2006, after Epstein's house in Florida had been raided by police. Now, I grant you, that wasn't well known to the public, but the royal family, with all their power and their money, do they not have to run background checks on their guests?
It's actually the police that are supposed to be running the background checks on the guests to make sure that they are okay and there's nothing untoward that can be labelled on them. They obviously either missed this one or were told to ignore it. So that really is down to the Metropolitan Police, because they are responsible for security within the precincts of Windsor Castle, and they would be responsible for checking those people who are on the guest list. Because you've got to remember, anybody on the guest list would be in close proximity of the royal family, and particularly the late Queen and Prince Philip. So that is a dereliction of duty in terms of the Metropolitan Police, and I don't think the royal family can actually be blamed for that one. All they can be blamed for is inviting those 3 people in the first place.
Dickie, you worked in that building behind you, Buckingham Palace, for a good 12 years. Do you think it's fair to say that the royal family are in the habit of covering things up that would embarrass them?
I think that's a bit too steep to say covering things up that embarrass them. A lot of the time, Andrew knew what he was doing, but a lot of the time the royals didn't know what he was doing because he didn't tell them the truth. I mean, you go to that Newsnight interview, he claimed that he told his mother that he was doing a television interview. I very much doubt he would have told his mother the content of that television interview. Probably would have bluffed her and said it's something like Pitch at Palace, which was one of his entrepreneurial charities. and she would have bought that. But to actually say that he was going in front of the cameras to talk about his relationship with Epstein and how he'd broken it off, he wouldn't have done that. Nobody knew at Buckingham Palace. So to sort of finger them and accuse them of a cover-up, in this instance, no. Nobody knew what was happening until it actually happened. What should have happened was the press secretary was there, and if he was there, he should have pulled the plug on that interview. It would have caused the story, created a big story, big headlines, but it would have pulled the plug on Andrew making a fool of himself, lying to the royal family. And we wouldn't be in the position that we are today.
Well, it gives me the impression that, of course, as the Queen's press secretary, you saw your duty to prevent Andrew making a fool of himself, but you could also say you would like to have prevented him exposing himself and the things he did wrong, because it would have damaged the reputation of the royal family. That just gives me the feeling that indeed the royal family and all the people who work for them do want to cover things up.
I think our job at Buckingham Palace was to act as a buffer between the media and the royal family, and if necessary, to protect them. Now, I've been asked many times, if I had been the job, what would I have done? I would have walked in front of the cameras, I would have pulled the plug and stopped it happening, because it was the sort of thing that Andrew's totally incapable of doing. We saw that from the Newsnight interview. He lied his way through, he was arrogant the way through, and he was bombastic, and just the wrong sort of person to put in front of a camera to do an interview. So that's what they should have done. It's not covering up, because this would have been out anyway at some stage or another, but it certainly would have prevented Andrew from making a fool of himself and making a fool of everybody else in the royal family.
Dickie Arbiter, thanks so much for joining us again on The Nexus. We really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, the UK's former ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, was arrested just 4 days after Andrew, again on suspicion of misconduct in public office. And the consequences could be very serious for the Prime Minister. Epstein's ghost is haunting both the UK's head of state and head of government, supposedly the two pillars of the nation. Andrew and Peter Mandelson, the unwanted links to the deceased paedophile. Both men, within a week of each other, arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Both men appear to have sent emails to Epstein containing sensitive trade and financial information. Both men visited Epstein Island, his various other homes, and tried to cover up the true extent of their relationship with him. The King is trying to distance himself from Andrew, and the Prime Minister is trying the same with Mandelson. But unlike King Charles, Keir Starmer must answer questions.
Did the official security vetting he received mention Mandelson's ongoing relationship with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein?
So clear. Prime Minister.
Yes, it did.
Well, Joseph Kotrie-Monson joins us now. He's a specialist criminal defence solicitor and director of the UK law firm Mary Monson Solicitors. Welcome to the programme, Joseph. How serious is the offence of misconduct in public office?
Misconduct in public office carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment, although sentences of that length are almost unheard of. However, sentences of between 1 and 3 years, fairly common. Low-level offences of, for example, a police officer using the police national computer to access information about a neighbour, for example. Police officer could get 2 or 3 years just for that. So the more serious, however, the allegation, and the more serious it is in the context of the duty that the person had and the level of the information, if it was about information that was passed, well, one could expect a sentence of a substantial length, maybe even several years.
And who will decide whether or not to charge and prosecute?
The decision about whether to bring a case on behalf of the government is made by the Crown Prosecution Service. That means the lawyers who act in criminal cases for the government, the lawyers for the police, as they're sometimes called. The police gather the information, the police investigate, but the decision about whether the case goes to court, that goes to that CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, and they will be interested in two things. is there enough evidence to get a conviction? And the test for them is there a reasonable chance of success for a conviction? Not whether they think they will definitely get a conviction. They also have to consider the public interest.
As a defence lawyer, how do you prepare for such a case?
The key thing, above everything, is to understand all of the facts, all of the context. Some behaviour, which might look inappropriate in some circumstances, once you know more context, it can actually be justified. Sometimes somebody has to neglect one duty in a government role because there's another more important duty. And, you know, that's not necessarily something that should be covered by the criminal law, because we want the public service people who work for us to do the best job they can in difficult circumstances.
Joseph Kotrie-Monson, thank you so much for your contribution today. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.